welcome to Learn with Roblox. In today's video, we're going to talk about the law of cosines. So what even is the law of cosines? Let me draw a triangle. And I'm going to label these sides A, B, and C. And I'm going to label one angle as big C. So notice how this angle of big C is opposite to side length C. So the law of cosines states the following. If you take the side length C, little c, and you square it, that is equal to a squared plus b squared. Those are the side lengths, minus 2 times a times b times the cosine of angle C, so the big C. So the law of cosines is just a formula relating the three sides of a triangle and one of the angles. Let's take a look at a few problems that show us how to use this formula. In this first problem, we have a triangle with side lengths of 18, 26, and an angle of 81 degrees between them, and we have to find this mystery side right over here. So let's use the law of cosines. Let me write that again. So it says that c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared minus 2ab times cosine of angle C. And now we just need to find ABC and angle C. So A and B are always the sides that are flanking an angle. They're right next to it. So notice that we have 81 degrees and 18 and 26 are the side lengths right next to that angle. Therefore, 18 and 26 are A and B. So I'm just going to call 18A. Let's call this guy B. And then that leaves our big angle C as 81 degrees, or big C as our angle of 81 degrees. And then this mystery is just our little c. So now we can fill in A, B, and angle C now. Let's do that. So let me just erase all this here. We're still going to have C squared because I'm still trying to find this side length over here that we called little c. But A is 18, so we're going to have 18 squared. Plus now B squared would be 26 squared then. And then minus 2 times A times B, that's 18 times 26. And then times the cosine of 81 degrees, because that's angle C. And then now just take out a calculator and compute this. So 18 squared is just 324 if you do that. 26 squared is 676. And then if you do 2 times 18 times 26, that's 936. And then if you take the cosine of 81 degrees, you should find that it is equal to 0.5 or 156. Let me erase a bunch that's at the top here. And then just continue to compute this. So I'm going to go back up now. So 324 plus 676 is just 1,000. And then if you do negative 936 times 0.156, you should get that is equal to negative 146, roughly. I'm just going to erase all this all at the bottom. And remember, we said that this was all equal to c squared. So then now, just do 1,000 minus 146. If you do that, that is 854, I believe. And now, to solve for c, just take the square root of both sides. The square and the square root cancel out, and you get that c is roughly equal to 29.22. So that is the answer for side length C. Let me just fill that in up here. So this is 29.22 units long. Let's go to the next one. In this problem, you have a triangle with side lengths of 67, 41, and an angle between them of 61 degrees. And we need to use that to solve for how long side x is. So whenever you see an angle, whenever you have an angle and you have two sides right next to it that are all given to you, that's an indication that the law of cosines is the formula you want. So let me write down the law of cosines. It states that if you have c squared, that's equal to a squared plus b squared minus 2ab times the cosine of angle C. So what are ABC and angle C? Start with angle C first. There's only one angle given in this problem, and that's 61 degrees. Therefore, that is C. And then now, if you know that 61 is angle C, the side that is opposite to the angle has to be side length of C. So in other words, x is just C in the law of cosines, side C. And then A and B are always defined as the sides that are right next to the angle that you have defined as angle C. So therefore, 67 and 41 are A and B. Now all we need to do is just fill in the numbers and solve for x. So I'm just going to erase all this and fill it in. So C squared, well, we said that side C is just side x. So we have x squared. And then A squared is just 67 squared. B squared is just 41 squared. Minus 2 times A times B, which are 67 and 41. And times the cosine of the angle, which is 61 degrees. Now, just take out a calculator and start computing this. So 67 squared is 4,489. 41 squared is 1,681. And then minus, if you do 2 times 67 times 41 first, that ends up being 5,494. And then all that times cosine of 61, which if you put that into a calculator, you should get 0.485. Then now let me just erase all of this up here. And then just continue to solve, or continue to simplify this. So 4,489 plus 1681, that's equal to 6,170, minus, if you do 5,494 times 0.485, that ends up being 2,663. And what is this equal to? We said it was equal to x squared. So now let me just erase all this at the bottom. And now if you do 6170 minus 2663, you should get that it is equal to 3,500 or 3,506. And then now to solve for x, just take the square root of both sides. The square cancels out the square root, and you get that side length x is equal to the square root of 3,506, and that is roughly 59.21. And that is our answer. So x is just 59.21. Let me just rewrite this and put down 59.21 for this side right over here. And we're done. Let's go to the next one. In this problem, we have a triangle with side lengths of 5, 7, and x, and we have an angle of 136 degrees between 5 and 7. So in this problem, I'm going to use the law of cosines. Why? Well, we have an angle of 136 degrees, and we're given that the sides right next to that angle are 5 and 7. So whenever you're given two sides and the angle between them, and you need to find the opposite side to that angle, it's usually a law of cosines problem. So let's review that. Law of cosine says that c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared minus 2ab times cosine of c. And now let's define a, b, c, and angle c. So angle c is just 136 degrees because, well, we weren't given another angle in the problem. A and b are always the sides right next to angle c. So therefore, 5 and 7 are a and b. So I'll just call 5a, I'll call 7b. And then now that side length of x in the corner, or at the top, that's just our side c. Now let's plug these all in and solve. So c squared, that's side c, which is just side x. X squared is equal to a squared is 5, so 5 squared. B squared is 7 squared. Minus 2 times 5 is a, 7 is b. And then cosine of angle c is 136. And then now we just need to compute this. So let me just rewrite x squared. And then 5 squared is 25. 7 squared is 49. And then minus 2 times 5 times 7 is 70. And then cosine of 136 is equal to negative 0.719. Don't be intimidated by the fact that this cosine is negative. Cosine can be negative. And then now just continue to simplify. 25 plus 49 is 74. And then minus 70 times minus 0.719. Well, two negatives cancel to make a positive when you multiply them. And you should get that this is equal to positive 50.35. And then if you do 74 plus 50.35, that's just 124.35. And this is all equal to x squared. Now take the square root of both sides. Square cancel out the square roots. So just compute the square root of 124.35. And you should get that x is equal to 11.15. And that's our answer. So I can just fill this in here. So this means that this side is 11.15, and we're done. In this problem, we have a triangle with side lengths of 7, 10, and 12, and we have a mystery angle that is opposite to the side that is 7 units long, and we need to find that angle. So whenever we have 3 sides and a mystery angle, this is a good setup for a law of cosines. So let me just review that. Law of cosines says that c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine of angle c, not side c. So let's just define ABC and angle C. So this mystery angle, because we're going to be using it in the law of cosines, it just has to be our angle C, because what else could it be? And then now A and B are always the sides right next to that angle. So 10 and 12 are A and B because they are right next to that angle. So I'm going to call 10A and B 12. But you could also flip that and make B 10 and A 12. And then that leaves 7 as side C. And that makes sense because opposite to angle C is side C, and 7 is opposite to that angle we're trying to solve for. So now let's just fill in 7, 10, 12, and solve for angle C. So let me do that. C squared, well, C is 7, so we have 7 squared. A squared, well, A is 10, so 10 squared. B is 12, so we have 12 squared. Minus 2 times 10 times 12, because that's A and B. And we have the cosine of C. And then now let me just erase all this at the top and continue to solve. So 7 squared is 49. 10 squared is 100. 12 squared is 144 plus 144. And then minus 2 times 10 times 12. If you do that, that ends up being 240 times the cosine of angle C, which we're trying to solve for. And then let's just erase all this at the bottom. And then if you do 100 plus 144, that is 244 minus 240 cosine of C. So let's subtract 244 from both sides to isolate the cosine C with the 240 on it. So then if you do that, 49 minus 244 is just negative 195. And that's equal to negative 240 cosine of C, because that's all we have left on that side. And then now, to isolate cosine of C, let's divide by negative 240 on both sides. And then the negatives will cancel out, because if you divide a negative by a negative, it becomes positive. And then if you do 195 divided by 240, that is equal to 0.8125. And that is equal to cosine of C. Now, how do we get angle C? We have this pesky cosine attached to angle C. Well, to undo a cosine, just use the inverse cosine function. So let me just write that down. So you want to use this cos minus 1 on your calculator and apply that to both sides. And then just do cosine or inverse cosine of cosine C. And then those inverse cosine always cancel out cosine to leave us C. And then take out your calculator and do the inverse cosine of 0.8125. And if you do that, you should get a number. And that number is 35.7. And that is how many degrees C is. So C is 35.7 degrees. So now I can just draw this and say we know it is 35.7 degrees. In this problem, you have a triangle with side lengths of 11, 13, and 18. And you need to find this angle over here that is opposite to 18, the side length of 18. So whenever we have three sides of a triangle and need to find a missing angle, it's a classic law of cosines problem. So let's review the law of cosines. The law of cosines states that c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared minus 2ab times the cosine of angle C. So let's define these quantities. That angle over there has to be C because it's the only angle in this problem that we care about. A and B are always the sides next to the angle. So let me call 11 A and I'll call 13 B. And then side C is opposite to angle C. So notice that 18 is opposite to that angle there. So therefore this is our side C. Now just plug in these numbers and let's solve for the angle. So c squared is 18 squared. A squared is 11 squared. B squared is 13 squared. Minus 2 times A is 11, B is 13, and then cosine of C, our mystery angle, which we don't know yet, so just keep it as cosine of C. I'll erase this at the top and then continue to simplify this expression. So 18 squared, that is 324. Actually, I can write that better. 324. 11 squared is 121. 13 squared is 169, so plus 169. And then minus 2 times 11 times 13 is just 286 times the cosine of C. Now I'll erase this all at the bottom now to continue simplifying. Now we have 324, and then that's equal to 121 plus 169 is 290 minus 286 cosine times cosine of C. And then now just subtract 290 from both sides. And then if you do that, 324 minus 290 is just 34. And then now we'll just have the minus 286 cosine C here. Minus 286 cosine of C. And just divide by minus 286 on both sides. So we can isolate the cosine of C. So on this side, we'll just have cosine of C remaining. And then if you do 34 divided by negative 286, you're going to get negative 0.119. And then now we need to solve for C only. I don't want cosine of C, I just want C. How do you get rid of a cosine? Just apply the inverse cosine function to both sides. So let me do that. So let's apply the inverse cosine, which looks like cosine to the minus first power, even though that's not what it actually means. It just looks like that. And then I need to apply inverse cosine on the other side. So the cosine and the inverse cosine cancel out and we're left with C, the angle we're solving for. And then go to your calculator and do inverse cosine of negative 0.119. Make sure your calculator is in degrees or you're going to get a different answer than what I get. But if you do that, you should get a number, and the number will be 96.8 degrees. Once again, if you left your calculator in radians, you'll get a different answer, but this is the answer in degrees. And just like that, we have solved for the angle. So that angle, I can just fill it in now, it's 96.8 degrees. And just like that, we're done. If you made it this far, congratulations on making it to the challenge problem of the day. So in this problem, we have a triangle with side lengths of 11, 7, and x. And we have an angle between 7 and x of 43 degrees. And based on that, we need to solve for x. So let's try using the law of cosines to solve for x. Let me write the law of cosines as always. So, oops, let me get that. C squared is equal to a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine of C, angle C. Now let's define A, B, C, and angle C. Angle C should be obvious. That's 43 degrees because we're not given another angle in this problem. Now be careful. A and B are always the sides right next to the angle. So therefore, I can call 7A and I can call X B. Although you could flip it and call A X and B 7, but that doesn't matter. And then now the side opposite to the angle is C, which is 11. So now let's plug in these numbers and solve for x. But I want you to notice that unlike the previous problems, instead of x being c, x is now b, and that will change how we solve this problem, as you will see shortly. So let's set it up. C squared is 11 squared. Let me turn on my pen. There you go. So we have 11 squared is equal to a squared is 7 squared, b squared is x squared, then minus 2 times 7 times b is just x times cosine of 43 degrees, because that is angle C. And then now let's just continue to simplify this. 11 squared is 121, 7 squared is 49, x squared is just x squared, can't really do anything about that. And then minus 2 times 7 is 14. And then I'm going to rearrange this and write the cosine of 43 in front of the x. And then cosine of 43, that is just 0.731. And that's times x. And then let's just find the overall coefficient on the x term. So minus 14 times 0.731 is equal to minus 10.23x. And then just subtract 49 from both sides. And if you do that, I think you should get 72. And now, do you see why this problem is much harder than the previous ones? We have to solve a quadratic equation to solve for x. So to solve quadratic equations, you want to bring everything to one side. So let me actually subtract 72 from both sides to set it equal to 0, because that is how you solve quadratic equations. And then now, to solve this quadratic equation, I'm just going to use the quadratic formula, because there's no way you can factor this. There's a 10.23 in the middle. That's not factorable. So I'll just go straight to the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula states that you have minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And a is 1, b is equal to negative 10.23, and c is equal to negative 72. Why? Because the a is always the coefficient on x squared, b is always the coefficient on x, and c is just a constant. So now let's fill in the quadratic formula. So minus b, well, notice that b is already negative 10.23. Therefore, if you do minus b, you're going to get positive 10.23. And then plus minus the square root of b squared, so negative 10.23. It's getting kind of messy, sorry. Minus, let me just rewrite that, that's too messy. So negative 10.23, 2 squared, minus 4ac, so a is 1, and c is negative 72, and then all over 2a. Well, 2 times 1 is just 2. And then now let's simplify that nasty square root. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 72 is just positive 288. And then if you do it negative 10.23 squared, you should get about 104.75. I'm just going to write all of this. So 104.65, sorry, it should be 65, plus 288. And then now do 104.65 plus 288. And then that ends up being 392.65. And then take the square root of 392.65, that's about 19.82. So now, let's just take both solutions, the positive and the negative solution. So what solutions will this lead us to? First do 10.23 plus 19.82. If you do that, that is 30.04. And then we have to divide by 2. Or the other solution is if you do 10.23 minus 19.82. If you do that, you get minus 9.59, I think, divided by 2. Now, which is our answer? We have two answers, but there's only one side length. Well, it's not going to be this one, right? Because if you do minus 9.59 divided by 2, that's a negative number. And do you think the side of a triangle can be negative? Of course not. So this is our answer. So now what is 30.04 divided by 2? If you do that, that's just 15.02. And this is our answer for x. So our answer to this problem is that x is 15.02 units long. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Thanks for watching.